in the previous one, image boards were a kind of underground for memes, and aggregators like 9gag were a kind of all the mainstream memes were. So what happened was that the memes on 4chan, because of, so 4chan as an underground community developed a very specific style and culture, which then was appropriated by people in the mainstream. And so with this, we came to the idea of ironic memes.
Interject for a bit and explain the platforms part.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back to the platforms, right. So the difference between image boards and aggregators is primarily the lifetime allowed for each internet meme that is posted on the website. I mentioned earlier the 3 traits of successful replicators. There were longevity, fecundity, and fidelity. What happens with 4chan is that you post something and it's there for a little while, and the time can be extended by the meme or the post attracting attention, which makes other people reply to the thread that the meme or the post was in, and keeps it afloat so that it's deleted slightly later on. But all threads are deleted after a while, and anything posted to the page or to the website disappears. And the only way that they survive are when they're stored externally. And so with 4chan, a culture of reposting developed, where people would constantly post things over and over because that was the only way to get the memes to survive. Or in other words, the only memes that survived were the ones that invited reposting. And so how this led to the difference between the underground and the mainstream was that with a website like 4chan, where reposting was a very important aspect of survival for the memes, meant that novelty became the prime pressure for the selection of memes. Whereas with image aggregators like 9gag or Imager or even places like Reddit, because they were stored on the site, and what would happen was with attention they would become, say, get bumped to the front again, or more people would see it, or something like that. An inverted culture of dislike for reposting emerged, because if it's already on the website, then if you post it again, you're wasting people's time by making them look at something that they probably have seen before, or if they haven't, then it's on them for not being familiar with their culture. And so this begins to become more and more accentuated as time goes on and the cultures reinforce in on themselves, with 4chan's underground culture becoming all about novelty, and the image aggregators' cultures becoming all about normativity. And this is analogous to approaches in grammar where the descriptivists will look at the way that language is used and say that however a word is being used is important, whereas with in the deciding of the definition, whereas with the prescriptivists, they would say there are certain rules and regulations to how language should be used. And we did see earlier, a couple of slides ago, that in older memes, people would get upset when you use them wrong. But with the newer memes, like with the Facebook page examples that were shown a bit, yeah, here it is. The whole point of the bottom two are to be doing something different, novel, and essentially considered wrong by the first two pages. it's all about novelty, and therefore it's all about doing something different from how it's used to being done. And that's where we're into ironic memes. And I'll pass it back on to Masha.
Okay. So with the split between the mainstream and the underground, there had to be a way of differentiating yourself from the mainstream. And in that, one of the ways was to post mainstream things ironically. In general, ironic memes, what they do is they take these mainstream memes and they use them in ways that are subversive. For example, they make them intentionally ugly with different types of distortion and image manipulation that some of which arise naturally through the way that the internet handles images, and some are very deliberately sought out and used. In general, ironic memes have darker themes than normie pre-ironic memes. For example, Laughing Colors is a light-hearted humor website, whereas various colors that are not laughing at the moment, with their profile pic saying "die" with a smiley face, is a much more cynical, much darker, much edgier type of humor.
Oh, and we should explain what we mean by normie or cringe. So she's been using the two words, which are internet slangs, and they're, well, at least the word normie is considered to be offensive because, well, there were some incidents on the internet, as they do happen, where it was used as a kind of a insult for the outgroup of the people who enjoy underground memes, and it's now sort of associated with terrorism. And anyway, what is meant by cringe is a kind of a visceral negative reaction that people tend to have when they see something that they're familiar with is being misused. Like with the prescriptivists, people get very angry when you use wrong grammar, and there's people that get very upset over memes in the same way, and the way that people on the internet treat memes is more in terms of an in-group, out-group dynamic rather than a purely grammatical or linguistic prescriptivist dynamic, because depending on context, memes take on different meanings, just like depending on context, art takes on different meaning, which was incidentally the way the 4 different meme pages shown earlier operated, where the same things from Laughing Colors could be posted to any of the pages below, and they would be seen as being ironic, as in they're to be laughed at rather than taken sincerely. And so ironic memes is all about the contextual aspect of memes. So yeah, that's Masha.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, so of course memes are meant to be laughed at, but the point of humor in ironic memes is making fun of the outgroup of the mainstream who are characterized by these pages. And so memes they treat normie just means mainstream. Ironic memes use mainstream memes as found art, and they present that found art in a new context. And instead of laughing at the jokes within the original meme, we're now laughing at how awkward and cringy and weird and unsophisticated the original meme is, rather than the intended joke of that meme. And so also with ironic memes, there's less emphasis on that kind of prescriptivism and how you're using that meme. Because ironic memes intentionally use memes wrong or weirdly or in a way that is subversive to their original typical usage. And some of the ways that they do that is not only through narrative. For example, right here we have the typical kind of clickbait thing that says, you know, banks hate him. See how he made $10,000 in an afternoon with one simple trick. You know, this is something that we see a lot. It's this kind of annoying advertisement. But ironic memes subvert that by changing the narrative to something like shooting a bank, you know, robbing a bank. So this kind of narratological subversion is inherent in ironic memes. And also it's interesting to note that, you know, whereas with normie or mainstream or memes, they typically are much more darker in theme as a general rule. So and so with ironic memes, there's actually kind of an attitude towards memes as with the whole in-group, out-group dynamic. The out-group just simply, you know, enjoys memes. Whereas the underground ironic memers consider memes in a more, because of the development of subcultures, the attitude towards memes becomes a little bit more protective. So while the general prescriptivist attitude of normie and mainstream memes is about using the memes wrong, with underground pages, it becomes the opposite, and with this emphasis on the changing of the subversion of narrative and style, there are basically not only do they they subvert not only the narratives of typical memes, but they also subvert the style. In terms of the narrative, here are some examples of typical ironic meme pages. They're, you know, about dark ideas like suicide and things like that. They use unusual, glitchy graphics and mundane images, and also stock images. For example, this page right here, almost all of their memes are based on this one stock photo model who does a lot of suicide-related photography. And so ironic memes become more artistic in their treatment of the objects that they use to create memes. So this page becomes almost like an artistic exploration of the object of this stock photo model. And so the ironic memes, whereas with normie memes, there was an attitude towards using them correctly and with using very specific types of graphics. With ironic memes, however, they are intentionally using subversion by using, for example, making the image just look worse than it was before by changing the colors or shrinking it or stretching it and doing things that make the image look bad. using the natural ways that JPEG compression happens. JPEG compression is basically the way that your computer stores image files. It can either compress them and make them smaller and easier to store, or it can remain the same. With the JPEG format, it compresses them. And as it compresses them, it distorts the image. And we see these kinds of patterns forming. Here we can see it in the slider, smaller scale, but here it's zooming in and you can really see these kind of squares. Ironic memes also use stock imagery and intentional, graphics that that aren't very pleasant to look at. So they intentionally subvert all of the prescriptive tendencies of unironic memes. And so we can see it's actually kind of similar to how in painting, in pre-modern era, it was looked down upon to see the brush strokes of the painter. Just as with pre-ironic memes, they aimed for a very clear style with readable words, with a very specific font, with using specific imagery. And with ironic memes, we break away from that by using the natural ways that the internet compresses imagery and mutates and distorts that imagery. And it becomes almost a celebration of that. Of course, it's often not very celebratory in attitude. But the thing is, just as with 4chan, with the images of 4chan being imported into image aggregators, nothing really stays underground too long if it's appreciated underground. And what happened was that these images that were underground became, or not just images, but also general concepts. For example, this frog right here, that's Pepe, became a beloved meme character in the underground who was used in a lot of different memes. And what happened was that he became popular and started being used by mainstream people and pages and things like that. And no longer was he cool because ironic memes were all about differentiating between the in-group and out-group. So once Pepe left the in-group, there was something that was kind of considered the death of Pepe. So Khalil Underwood is a very famous page. It's a very popular page. And when things like this happen, this is originally an ironic meme that left the underground and was posted on a very popular page. And things like this began happening. And so Pepe no longer had that value as, it was almost perverted by the fact that it was no longer mainstream, but it was no longer underground. And so we had reactions like this. So here we have Katy Perry posting Pepe's, best of Tumblr posting Pepe's. And so essentially this was the reaction of the underground, in that their beloved Pepe was stolen and perverted and no longer, it was no longer this special underground in-joke that other people didn't understand. It was now something popular. And so normies killed Pepe. And so with the...
Yeah, so you can see an interesting kind of prescriptive emerging in the underground as well, as they begin to define this particular meme as something that is valuable because it's used in a certain way in opposition to the culture of the mainstream. And as they started finding out that the popularity of the meme began reaching levels so high that just about everyone knew about the meme, and it wasn't a kind of it wasn't a marker of differentiation between the underground and the mainstream anymore. And so another culture emerged within the underground, which started making fun of the culture of wanting to differentiate between the underground and the mainstream through the use of ironic memes, which is the meta-ironic memes. So I'll pass back on to Masha here.
Yeah. So, oops. So as ironic memes grew in popularity, the conventions and the way that they told their narratives, the way that they conveyed meaning, almost took on, as Song said, their own prescriptivist attitude, in that there became, a right way to use Pepe and a wrong way to use Pepe. And the right way was to use Pepe in an ironic way, an unpopular, an underground way, and in not a sincere way. And so the thing is, with those the styles of ironic memes becoming more popular and more understood and more solidified as a visual language, no longer were ironic memes as subversive as they wanted to be, as they originally had started out. Ironic memes, more and more people joined the community of ironic memes. And so with that, they diluted the innovative and subversive spirit of ironic memes. And often they diluted it with, their own desire to... But then since the ironic meme community grew so much, it almost became ridiculous to differentiate from it, because ironic memes are now a huge community. And so what happened was so in an artistic movement, you always have the forerunners who are doing the innovation, and then you have the people who accept the innovation and begin to join the bandwagon. And so it became that ironic memes were no longer this underground. And so the sentiment changed. The sentiment in the public became more like this. The state of ironic meme subculture is another normie community by a different name. So because it was no longer an underground, it was a lot of people, the people that were in it were no longer only those innovative and subversive people, but just random people who appropriated the style and brought with it their own ideology. So so basically ironic memes devolved into people just ranting using that style, using the subversive style of ironic memes just to rant about their own ideologies and ideas that weren't really, that also grew to take on their own level of cringe. So that kind of, the cringe of pre-ironic memes grew and in a different way, ironic memes became cringy. because of their, the solidifying of the style, and because of the population, the demographic changing to people that simply hopped on the bandwagon rather than being innovators in the style. And so so the attitude changed towards ironic memes. It became critical of the way that ironic memes had devolved in their general. They just became a kind of whining. That was no longer subversive artistically or narratologically.
Yeah, what was a political project in art became something of a mere decoration that anyone could just take up and use for their ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the style, for example, the style of ironic memes was appropriated to discuss, feminism, and which, then just became, the ironic meme just became a medium to rant. Well, of course, the ironic memes were always a medium of self-expression, but the artistic value of them initially was interesting and subversive. And once they became an established style, it was no longer subversive. And so, in order to overcome that subversion, we needed to move to further levels of irony to differentiate from the outgroup, to differentiate from the mainstream. Because now that everyone understood the jokes, they were no longer fun. And so what happened was memes started playing with the actual idea of irony itself.